From To Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello, Keto lovelies. I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds, and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein, scale to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalised keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. This week's extraordinary woman is Amanda Åkesson. Amanda is a writer for the low-carb site Diet Doctor and has been following some form of low-carb or keto diet since 2014, but it took a long time for her to get it just right. Before that, she simply avoided starch and sugar as much as she could, but didn't calorie count. Her success story has been featured on the Diet Doctor website, and the link can be found in the show notes. Amanda is currently really interested in mental health and keto, gut issues, body image and body acceptance, and whether we should restrict protein on a low-carb diet. Amanda describes herself as a keto nerd in her article on the Diet Doctor website. I loved her approach to self-experimentation and her practice of keeping a document on her computer to record all of her latest findings. Welcome, Amanda, to the Keto Woman Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
It looks like Sweden is very sunny. I can see it streaming through your windows.
Yeah, it's been a really warm, spring and beginning of summer, so it's really nice. I'm not very used to that.
No, perfect. It sounds like Northern Europe has had it better than us that are a bit more further south. It's been constant rain and storms here.
Oh no.
could do with swapping over. Yeah. I'll send you mine and I'll take yours. So tell us a bit about what your life was like before keto and what made you start looking for it in the first place.
I think I've always been quite interested in diets, and maybe it didn't necessarily come from a really good place or, wanting to do what's healthy and good for me, essentially, because as a child, I was quite overweight, a really young child. And I remember, my nurse said that to my parents that, she really needs to do something about her weight. And, you're just a child, so that's quite traumatic. But then when I entered my teenage years, I lost weight, naturally, like you do.
So how old were you? What sort of age were you when you were starting to be told that you were carrying more weight than you should?
I don't remember exactly, but let's say it was around 8 years old up until my teenage years, I suppose.
Young then.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was really into competitive swimming, and I got really fit during my teenage years. When you become a teenager, your hormones change, and I actually my body composition changed. So I started looking slimmer and more womanly, I guess. And I had this really cool friend in middle school, and she was a vegetarian and even vegan, and I looked up to her a lot. So I was like, yeah, maybe I should try the vegetarian diet. So when I was around 13, I guess, I started eating a vegetarian diet, and I did that for a few years. And sometimes I would have fish, and sometimes I would be a vegan, but it was fairly strict, I guess. Yeah.
And how did you find that? What impact did that have on your health at the time?
I just remember, I was young and relatively healthy, so I don't think it really, and I wasn't that in tune with how diet affects you. I just thought it was healthy. And
quite active as well, by the sounds of it.
Exactly, I was really active. I was normal weight. When I look back on photos, though, I can see that I actually got quite skinny. I wasn't as muscular as I would have been if I would have eaten a healthier diet, I suppose. But
not to say that you can't be healthy. Plenty of healthy vegetarians. Course. I think it gets a bit more difficult when you get into the slightly more extreme of vegan. But even that, I think you just have to be a bit more watchful, don't you?
Definitely. Of
the finer balance, because it's that much more restrictive.
Yeah.
So you're in your teens. You're fairly active, vegetarian for a few years, and what direction did it take?
Yeah, I kept doing a lot of swimming, and I stayed quite slim. And then I got an injury in my shoulder, and I had to quit, unfortunately, when I was about to start high school in Sweden. And so throughout high school, I wasn't particularly active. I did some yoga, which I still do. I suppose I kind of always intuitively knew that sugar wasn't great for me, and I didn't really feel great with, eating breads and lots of pasta and stuff. So I guess I was somewhat, conscious of carbs, even though I wasn't following a low carb diet or anything. I was just, eating, what I thought was healthy, I suppose. But then that went on throughout high school. But then in my final year, I noticed that despite, being quite conscious, I put on a little bit of weight. It wasn't a lot. I can't really tell exactly how many kilos. It was a really insignificant amount of weight anyways. And because this was a really stressful period in my life, I started looking into diets. Like, I felt really insecure. I was about to start college. Like, I need to... I don't know. It was some kind of self-esteem issue. Maybe I need to change my body, essentially.
Very normal for young women of that age. It's so typical, isn't it, to start feeling insecure with, especially the way you look.
Yeah, exactly. But
even if there's nothing to feel insecure about.
No, exactly.
With hindsight, but we've all been there.
So I started. I essentially went on this really. It was kind of low carb, I guess. But it wasn't coming from a good place. It came from, I started it because of really low self-esteem and like, I need to do something about my body. So it wasn't that healthy at all. So I ended up losing a lot of weight and becoming quite thin in 6 months. I was never underweight or, diagnosed with an eating disorder. It didn't escalate up to that degree, essentially, but it wasn't healthy for sure. And then I went off to college, and I really had issues with my gut. That has started before. I've always had some kind of gut issue, IBS, and that just started escalating really badly. And I also had lots of issues with anxiety. And I started this quite tough degree in economics. And I realized that I cannot keep on living on Diet Coke and salads. It was that kind of a low carb diet, not very nutritious or whatever. So I just I just said that, okay, I can't do this. I'm just going to try and stop counting calories and being really obsessive about it and just try and eat as healthily as I could. But I was still having, anxiety issues and IBS, and I ended up being put on an antidepressant, basically. And I mean, I felt better, I guess. But then I had appendicitis. And I had to have surgery and taking, lots of antibiotics, and that messed up my gut even more.
Yes, I can imagine if you've already got a sensitive gut, and then and that, I mean, it's so closely linked, isn't it, with anxiety and stress, IBS.
Exactly.
That can be something that sets it off, and then you throw antibiotics into the mix as well. You're really going to mess with your system, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. I think the whole brain-gut connection is really interesting, especially given my personal, history. But I mean, that just, I don't know what happened there, but I just started feeling exhausted. I would have, explosive diarrhea, so to speak. And it was really horrible. And
which really unsettling. And especially, for a young woman at college, and that's something that, again, is just going to add so much to your anxiety and your self-esteem and make you so anxious about going out and, is this going to happen when I'm out?
Yeah.
Gosh, yes.
And then I really started, I started feeling exhausted and everything, and I just started gaining weight really rapidly. I guess it was because of the a combination of like the inflammation and having kind of dieted and healthily, like it wasn't kind of rebound weight gain going on.
What were the doctors telling you at this time? Obviously if you've got gut issues, presumably they were advising you in some way about your diet.
Yeah, no, nobody really mentioned anything about diet, to be honest. I was quite, I don't think I've ever gone to any doctor and they've said anything about diet. They just offer medications. That's quite disappointing, actually.
So you were just left floundering a bit, really.
And I just felt really, really horrible. It was quite hard to, I really struggled to stay on top of my studies with all this going on. It was quite tough, I guess. And I was like, okay, what's going on? I started feeling more and more depressed and anxious because I didn't see how things would get better. And I started, isolating and not meeting as many friends as and I was living on my own and away from my parents, in Stockholm. And it was really, it was a really dark time, I guess, in my life. Must
have been very difficult to be able to focus on your study as well. I mean, you've not only got all these things going on with your brain, but, and your mental health, but the physical gut issues and things. I mean, as we know now, we talk about brain fog and things, don't we? And about how mental clarity can improve so much, when you go low carb and keto. But at that point, it must just have all been confusing, I should think. You probably found it quite difficult to study, even though you were isolating yourself and focusing on that, probably.
Yeah. And then I decided, like, I felt really, hopeless, and I just decided to stop my medication and taper down. And then I felt, even worse because you get those withdrawal symptoms and everything. And I was like, I don't know, is there something wrong with my, with my head and my brain? So I sought help, I went to a psychologist, essentially, and was quickly diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression. And on top of that, I've always been really prioritizing sleep. I love sleeping. I don't have a problem, going to bed at 9 or 10 p.m. that's really important for me. And all of a sudden, I couldn't sleep at all. I would, try and go to bed and couldn't fall asleep for hours. Then I would wake up at, 1, 2, 3 anxiety attack, and I just couldn't go back to sleep. It was really horrible. So I was just in this, wired and tired thingy. Yeah.
Yes, that's a weird state to be in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you can almost get too tired to sleep, which sounds a bit crazy, but it's true, isn't it? You can feel so exhausted, and your body's really exhausted, but you can't switch your brain off. No. I call it brain wearing, and it's particularly if I'm stressed and I'm having problems with depression, it's when you're trying to get to sleep. Yeah. And also you're probably putting more pressure on yourself because you're getting cross with yourself because you can't get to sleep, but you can't switch your brain off, and mine it'll go round and round and round, and it'll start making all these plans for the next day and all these things that I need to do to the house, and then go into great detail about how all the jobs I need to do to finish off the kitchen or whatever it is, and I'll just go into this great crazy detail that just keeps my brain going and going and going, and which means you can't sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really horrible. And it's just a vicious cycle. And
exactly, because the more tired you get, the worse it gets. And so, So what kind of advice? I mean, the psychologist diagnosed you, but what advice and help did they give you to move forward?
It was so interesting, but because it was as if I've completely changed personality over, a really short period of time. I started having issues I started isolating, like I said. I started experiencing agoraphobia. That's like you're really afraid of going through like open spaces, like if there's a market or something. Or in my case, we had this really big, I don't know what to call it. Like I could essentially not walk through the lecture hall at my university because I would feel so anxious, and all of these things. So it was really troublesome. Social phobia. I'm a really sociable person. I love speaking to people. I've never really had a problem with initiating any contact with people. And that's all of a sudden that started happening. It was really, interesting and sad.
So everything was feeding back into you, becoming more and more insular. You were having all these anxiety problems with being out and about and dealing with people and dealing with open spaces and all sorts of things.
And then constantly being, preoccupied with my gut, of course, because it just wasn't. I mean, why am I having constant pain? And I have to make sure that there's a bathroom wherever I'm going. Like, can I really be at this lecture at this time? Because maybe I cannot walk, a kilometer without having access to a bathroom. It's really horrible. Yeah.
So what changed? Something must have triggered you into changing this for the better.
I started being really, I knew a lot about diet at this point, right? And I was kind of interested in the biohacking thingy. And so I started self-experimenting, not just taking this template, low-carb template, but really trying to figure out what worked for me. And it took a really long time. I still get I'm fine now, but I can get relapses and I constantly learn things, I suppose. But I started keeping this document and trying to figure out which food triggered, my symptoms, essentially. And what I figured out, and it took a really long time for me to realize that certain supplements, really were bad for my gut. And fiber, like even healthy, like low carb vegetables, could really trigger an episode. Yeah, so it was lots of things. Coconut oil as well, because we're told that that's really that's part of a keto diet, right? But for some people, it can be really triggering, I guess. Yeah.
And so you took the low carb approach, but why in particular did you take that approach? Just, was there some book you read or something that someone mentioned, or just because it was, something you stumbled across? Why did you decide to go in that direction as opposed to, something else?
I mean, Diet Doctor, or the Swedish equivalent at the time, was called Kostdoktorn. It's been a big site in Sweden for a really long time, and Andreas has been an advocate for years. And reading his, blog and site, I kind of figured that it's the right approach, essentially.
I see. So something that if you're Swedish, you're living in Sweden, it's just something that you would naturally be aware of.
Definitely.
As part of your environment. Right?
Definitely. Yeah. So that's how I took that kind of, route. Yeah.
Well, certainly a good place to start.
Yeah, I think so. And another thing, I've gradually healed all these issues, right? But like I said, it took really a lot of changing, I had to change my views a lot of times, even in the context of low carb, in order to get the results that I've gotten. And so regarding fiber, and maybe vegetables are really not that healthy for people who suffer from severe gut issues, and even protein. That I've changed my mind a lot on that as well. Yeah.
Well, tell me a bit about that. Tell me a bit about, how you started and what you've discovered along the way with your IBS, with your mental health issues. What have been some of those changes? What are some of the perspective and assumptions that you started with that you've had to really change a lot along the way?
Even with just following a keto diet, I improved a lot over time just by, being strict and just sticking with the diet. A lot of things healed, but it was really interesting because I actually had a relapse and at this time I considered myself pretty healthy, but in 2017, that was 1 year ago, in February, for some reason, I started having this severe IBS episode. And it always correlates with my anxiety. So I started getting lots of anxiety and depression. It just came back all of a suddenly. And I got really frustrated, and I knew so much about diet. So I decided to try something completely different. And I went to an acupuncturist, or a Chinese medicine specialist. And she looked at me and she said, "You need to eat more red meat." And I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting," because I was really moderating my intake of protein on this keto diet, right? And she also said, "You need to stay away from onions, garlic." Of course, I didn't eat that much of that anyways. But then I said, "Okay, what about cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower?" That's something I've always been eating plenty of on my keto diet. And she said, "Nuh-uh, not when you're not right now anyways." So I essentially went on this zero carb diet for a few weeks. I ate a lot more protein or ground beef essentially, and I also started taking this oregano oil supplement. And within days, all my symptoms just disappeared. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I know a lot of people actually find, to their horror, that they have problems with things like cauliflower. So the cruciferous group in general. But I know the other thing that gets mentioned in relation to IBS quite a lot are the FODMAPs, aren't they? So anything that sort of ferments a bit, and you mentioned fiber.
Yeah.
They're all the kind of things that can really trigger IBS, can't they? But like you say, they're the typical sort of keto vegetables that are spoken about. So people are often a bit horrified when they're advised to. There's someone in my group at the moment who's been advised to not necessarily give them up forever, but try not having them for a while to see if that's part of the problem.
Yeah. It was really interesting. And in retrospect, of course, I mean, fiber is really, it's not good for your gut, right? It's quite irritating. You don't absorb it and so forth. But sometimes things don't stick until you have a personal experience with it, right? And you have to practically implement this change. Yeah. And
so you saw improvement, how long did it take before giving up these things?
I mean, it was maybe 2 days, and then it was completely changed. And then, I mean, a week, it was really, really fantastic, I think. Yeah.
And what happened after that? So is that something that you've then stuck with, that you find you have to eat that way all the time? Or is it something that is a sort of countermeasure to when you have an attack? I should imagine when you're used to having attacks like that, you kind of want to avoid anything that's likely to flare it up. I mean, how do you? I mean, you said you resolved those issues quite quickly, but what happened then? Did you carry on with eating in a carnivorous way, or did you start bringing things back in again?
I wouldn't really say that I'm a carnivore, because sometimes I still eat, broccoli or these things. I try to make sure that they're well cooked, but generally just trying to avoid them as much as possible maybe has been really helpful. If I have a flare, I definitely stay away from them, but sometimes I don't react to them at all. It's as if there is some kind of irritation, then they just exacerbate the problem. But if I'm in a period where I'm not that stressed and everything's just fine, then it's not a problem.
I think like with so many of these issues that are tied into, the autoimmune system, and especially when they're tied in with mental health issues as well, it's a kind of stacking system, isn't it? So, if you haven't got those things at the bottom of the stack, the broccoli is not going to tip you over.
Exactly.
But if you've already got some stress with work, a bit of anxiety with something going on in your personal life, so you've already put that stack up quite high.
Yeah.
It could just be the tiniest bit of broccoli is just going to tip you over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I always default to that whenever I have a relapse or some kind of flare.
And so what does your day-to-day keto look like at the moment?
I love ground beef. So I eat a lot of that, just beef patties, eggs, butter. I do salmon, and I love slow cooking. So I do that a lot as well, especially in the weekends when I have more time. So steaks and béarnaise sauce or something. It's really, really delicious.
So you like dressing them up with different sauces and different...
Yeah.
Do you find things like spices, and how much do things like that affect you? Are they easier on your system?
I really try to not eat that many spices. I don't really crave them either. I know some people really like their seasonings and everything. I noticed that I haven't really figured out exactly what spices I react to, but I know that whenever I was in Copenhagen last year with my mother and my sister, and we ate at it was a Thai restaurant, and it was like chicken and broccoli, cauliflower, and some coconut milk, I believe, and then some, I guess, I don't know if it was chili or pepper or something, and I really reacted to that, and that could be regarded as strict keto. So my guess is that it was the seasonings or the spices that messed up my gut. But yeah,
difficult to tell.
It is.
A few confounding factors in there.
Exactly.
And you mentioned the oregano oil. Is that something you continue to take, or is it just something you take if you have a flare-up?
I know that I've suffered from SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that really, I think that led up to my flare, in February 2017. So I always take that whenever I have a flare, but I definitely don't take that on a regular basis. I think it's quite potent, actually, given the drastic change that I experienced.
And how do you take that? Did you say it was capsules, or you take it as the oil?
I know that you can take it as capsules, but I actually have this. It's essentially you take a few drops in a glass of water and you just stir it and then you drink it. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, actually, because I stumbled across oregano oil doing a search. You're like this. It was for my dogs. Mm-hmm. I often find treatments for my dogs. It was my French bulldog who's had problems on and off ever since I got her at the age of 5. I've had her for 3 years now, and gets mites and irritation in her ears. And I used to go to the vets, and he used to give me these drops. And it used to sort it out, but it was a recurring problem that kept coming back. And so I took her in one day. In actual fact, I think I just went to pick up some of the drops because I knew what the treatment was. Mm-hmm. Get there, and they wouldn't let me have them. There'd been some kind of change to the regulation. I had to take her in. She had to have a test that had to be sent off to the lab. Then, and then they had to yes or no, and then they would give me the treatment. Anyway, it was going to cost a fortune. Mm-hmm. And so I got on the internet and looked at what was in this treatment. And it was things like antibacterial, antibiotics, steroid. There were different things in it. Great. So I put in a search, what's the best natural antibiotic, antibacterial? And oregano oil kept coming up. And so I ordered some. I think it cost me €3 or something, a little thing of essential oil. And I mixed it in with coconut oil as a base, because you have to be really careful with essential oils, don't you? Because there aren't many at all that you can apply directly. They can burn you. Yeah. So I put a few drops in with some coconut oil. I also put a little bit of tea tree in, and I call it magic oil because it not only dealt with her ears faster than the medication I was getting from the vets before, but it hardly ever comes back. Yeah. It used to be something that was every few months. Mm-hmm. And now, I can't remember the last time I put some in her ears. And my big deer hound, Daisy, an old wound where she'd had an abscess removed years ago, all of a sudden, it went sort of septic and it opened up. And quite a big, we're talking probably 4 centimetres across, and it opened up. And she hates going to the vet. So I thought, well, I'm just going to try and treat this for a couple of days without going to the vets and see what happens. And I cleaned it right out, trimmed all the fur, and would pack it with this magic oil and dress it. And every day I changed it, cleaned it, repacked it. Within a week, that quite big hole was starting to seal up. Within 2 weeks, it was like nothing had ever been there. Quite incredible. So
yeah, it's incredible.
The power of, natural herbs and oils that we can use, can be really significant and can actually treat more effectively than the medications you might be given. You said before that you were given medication after medication to help, with your IBS and your depression, and you weren't finding any of those helped. But you say that, taking this oregano oil when you've had a flare-up works almost instantaneously. Yeah, it's really amazing. And in terms of anxiety, I don't do a lot of experimentation with supplements and such. I feel like I have this, I kind of know what works for me, but if I start having anxiety issues, I always take L-theanine, and it's been really helpful for me. I've read that
by going on a ketogenic diet, it has, of course, a profound effect on your brain, right? It can help manage epilepsy and such. And it actually alters your neurochemistry a bit, or the GABA glutamate balance. So GABA is a really calming neurotransmitter, right? And a lot of medications act on this particular neurotransmitter. So by simply going on a ketogenic diet, I guess I've kind of stabilized my brain chemistry. But L-theanine is a supplement which also increases your GABA. So that's been really helpful if I, on a particular day, have anxiety and I can't really tell why.
That's interesting. So it's not something you take all the time. It's something that has quite a quick impact then, because I know, certainly with general antidepressants, you need to be taking them for about a month before they tend to start working. But this is something that works really quickly. So, so explain to me, when would you take that? If you wake up one particular day and you're just feeling a bit off mentally, then you think that's a day when you would take that supplement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I take this, it's from, I think, Thorne Research. It's 200 milligrams, I believe. And I would just take a pill. Usually, since I'm quite sensitive to fiber, I, cut the capsule open and I take out the powder and I stir it in water and I just take and it really alleviates all symptoms within 30 minutes. It's really, I think it's really fantastic.
That's really interesting, and certainly something when we finish, I'm going to be straight on Google to have a look at, because I mean, depression and migraines are something that keto has helped me with a lot, but I can't say, it's got rid of them completely. And I have periods where my depression's really bad. And I get, like you were saying before, I get really frustrated because you think you've solved this problem as if it's ever as easy as that. Although, for some people it seems to be. And I suppose it depends what the root cause of that problem was in the first place. Yeah. If it came down to your diet, by fixing that, it is going to completely resolve it. But it's frustrating where I can wake up and it's one of those days where my depression, sometimes I feel it. I mean, depression has got to be so different for everybody, but I have those days where it feels so it feels like a real physical presence. I can feel it in my system. I can feel like this anxiety and this dread. That feeling, those butterflies you get in your stomach when when something awful is going to happen, or you've got an exam that you're dreading, so I call it that feeling of dread, and I feel it, and everything feels like everything's pressing down. And gosh, yes, if there was something I could take that might help with that's especially a natural kind of supplement, because I've been on various medications for decades and really glad to have come off them. For me, I didn't feel that they really benefited and didn't have much impact. So it's really interesting, and I'm sure for other people too, to hear about something that helps immediately like that. So it's not even something that you've got to take continuously for a while before it's going to start working, to have something that works that quickly.
And I have to be quite careful. I mean, given my history with depression and anxiety, those are deadly disorders, right? And if I say that, I cured my depression and my generalized anxiety disorder with the keto diet, that's not really true, right? It's not cured. If I go off my diet, I will relapse, they will come back. And I believe that there's always some degree that you cannot control, even with the strictest of diets. There is a genetic predisposition probably, and something that's been going on, right? It's not even related to diet, maybe.
Yes, exactly. And it's just all these other factors that you can't always control. Like I was saying before with this stacking system, that there's just this stack, and if you've got quite a few things coming in, lower down the stack, it's not going to take much to tip you over into feeling depressed, having migraines, tipping in your case with the IBS as well.
Yeah.
And we can't control everything.
No.
But it gets to that point, doesn't it? Where you have such a good result with changing your diet, you suddenly think, that's the end of it. I'm not going to have these problems anymore. And I don't know about you, but my natural inclination is always to blame myself. If something, if I suddenly get migraines for a week or my depression comes back, my first thought is, well, have I screwed up? What have I been doing wrong for this to start happening again? Where, of course, it's, more than likely it's not anything I've done.
Yeah, exactly. There's always going to be something maybe in the environment that can trigger it that's totally, completely out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to do, the best you have to really try to manage it as good as you can, I guess.
Exactly. And just be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
So in general, though, you've seen great improvements in your IBS and with your mental health. You say that you don't have many days where you feel like you need to take this supplement to help out.
No. I feel really fantastic, on an everyday basis. And I rarely have a flare nowadays, which I'm immensely grateful for.
And I think it's interesting what you were saying about before, about you have this document that you add to over time.
Yeah.
That you make notes about what's going on.
Yeah.
And I do say that to people quite a lot, that it is useful to keep a journal of some kind.
Yeah.
Because you forget, don't you?
Yeah.
You forget what's been going on. So if you do keep a note of things, you can start to see correlation between different things happening. What works, what isn't.
I have this, I essentially keep a document on my computer and I write under different categories. I guess this is because I'm quite a nerdy person and I'm also, I really like structure and everything. So I write, everything from, if I do like I did before, a carnivore experiment. Okay, so what are the things that I've experienced from that? And then I have another category with my gut, sleep, my menstrual cycle, and of course my mental health and weight. And it's really, I really think that's a great thing to do, especially if you struggle with things that are hard to combat even on a keto diet.
Is there anything that you found in keeping those notes? Is there anything that's surprised you? Anything that's jumped out that you weren't expecting? Any, correlations or anything that you've seen that you wouldn't have expected and you probably wouldn't have noticed had you not been keeping notes?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things was, of course, my sleep got better, my anxiety and got a lot better. My IBS got better when I started eating red meat or more red meat, I guess. So that was something I really didn't believe it, but I clearly saw a pattern. Some other things. I'm really interested in like tracking moods in relation to my menstrual cycle. That's really interesting. I always get a little bit, I feel quite low. It's not unmanageable, but I'm definitely not as energetic as I am, on a regular basis, where, 2 days prior to my period.
People often notice a change in their appetite, don't they, at that time as well? Just want to eat all the things.
Very true. Yeah, very true. That's actually something I've noted as well. 2 days prior, I just start eating a lot. And looking at my tongue, I have bite marks on the sides of my tongue before my period, and that is from fluid retention.
Right.
I think that's quite interesting.
Yes, it is. It's another thing I've Googled before. There's supposed to be a lot that you can tell about your tongue, the shape, like you say, at the edges, the kind of coating, all sorts of different things.
Yeah, for sure.
It's useful. Yeah, it's useful having these notes and seeing things that jump out at you that you might not necessarily appreciate otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know Amber O'Hearn would certainly, I expect you're familiar with her work and her self-experimentation, but she's obviously noticed a huge change in her mental health with an uptake in red meat. So it gets vilified in some areas, doesn't it? Red meat, but that's not what you've noticed.
Amber is really cool. I actually did an interview with her, and I wrote the post about her story, and it was published just recently. Yeah, she has a fantastic journey, I guess.
Yes, a really clear correlation for mental health and carnivore.
Yeah.
And so tell me about you. I mean, you have a great working environment these days, don't you?
Absolutely.
Tell me about how you got to work for Diet Doctor. That must have really been something for you. I mean, Diet Doctor is special to a lot of us all over the world, but being Swedish and living in Sweden, like I say, and being like you were saying earlier, being so aware of it in your culture and your environment, it must be really something special to be working there.
Yeah, it was really it's quite a funny story actually, because I've been following the blog, for quite a long time, and then after my second year at university, I read this ad on the site where they were looking for an editor, and I just spontaneously applied. I really didn't think that I would get the job, but I just thought it sounded so interesting. But then I ended up getting the job, and I decided to take, a gap year, I first thought, but it turned out to be 2 gap years because I really love working here. Yeah.
I see. So yes, because we have spoken about this. So this is you going back to study. This is you going back to you finishing that degree you took a gap year from.
Exactly. I have 1 more year to finish my bachelor's degree in economics.
Right. It shows just how tempting it was to work for Diet Doctor, to take you away 2/3 the way through your degree.
And I'm going to feel really sad, not only because my coworkers are just amazing, and I think that it's such a friendly environment to work at, because we have this thing, I think, or this common interest that really ties us together, right? But also what's really great is that nobody criticizes me when I eat, spoonfuls of butter. And that happens all the time, right? At university, when people are not into keto and they think that you're completely crazy. And actually in Stockholm, people are quite health conscious, I think, in this city, but I have so many friends that are vegans and vegetarians. So yeah, it's interesting.
They must look at you in horror eating your ground beef and butter.
Yeah, they think I'm crazy.
The worst possible thing you could be eating as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, that's what most of us face in our everyday lives, where we work, who we socialise with. Usually the majority of those people eat so differently to the way we do. So yeah, like you say, it is lovely to be able to just be surrounded by like-minded people, and for them not to take a second glance at what you're eating as looking anything other than completely normal to them. Yeah,
it's really fantastic.
Well, I wish you luck with your sabbatical now from Diet Doctor and finishing off your degree.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're very well set up to have the mental clarity that you need for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Final year.
Yeah, it was really a struggle at some point. And it feels so different, now. Yeah, that I feel really great.
Yes, it's going to be a completely different experience, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Fabulous. Well, perhaps you could leave us with a top tip for the listeners.
I think that in the end, it comes down to what works for you. I think people can probably guess that that's what I'm going to say, given my story and background, but yeah, you have to try a lot of things to get it right. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, I've learned the most from my mistakes anyways, and I guess that it's the same for a lot of other people. Yeah. So try and experiment, and yeah.
Exactly. Be open to learning new things. I mean, I think that's the thing, you know, these words like mistakes and cheats, and always say to people who are feeling badly about them, but have you learned something? Because if you've learned something from it, if you've learned from, you know, so you've been really strict keto for 6 months, and then, you know, you go to a friend's wedding or something, and you feel really bad about not having a piece of the wedding cake, or joining in, or you know, whatever it is. But you'll learn something from that.
Exactly.
You know, you'll quite possibly end up, you know, feeling bad. Your digestive system will feel bad, or mentally you'll feel bad, or whatever it is. Or you might find that you don't feel bad at all. You might find that actually you've trained your body. Your body is running so efficiently. You're metabolically so healthy that you find that you can have the odd moment like that, and it's not going to impact you that much. So you could learn so many things from an experience like that, that the assumption is that you're going to feel badly, you're going to start beating yourself up from it. But you just switch that perspective.
Yeah. Be
kind to yourself, and okay, so what have I learned from this? Be it good, bad, indifferent, you're going to learn something from it.
Yeah.
And so it's not a mistake, it's a valuable experience going forward, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it sounds like you've had a lot of those, and you've changed and been willing as well to just change your opinion and your approach if you find that something's not working very well, or something surprises you.
Yeah.
Just change it.
Exactly.
And keep notes. Keep a document on your laptop.
Yeah, yeah.
That sounds like a very good idea.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, and I wish you the best of luck for your future studies.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast. So please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's quote is from Mary Ann Radmacher. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.